Hey all, so today we've got a game against Warpbane Grey Knights. We're playing the Take and Hold primary mission, Hidden Supplies mission rule on Search and Destroy deployment. So this is actually the first of my tournament group stage games. It was meant to be against Raven Guard's Vanguard Spearhead, but that got moved back. I haven't actually played much against Grey Knights, and certainly not with this army anyway. I am aware of their shenanigans, you know, the uppy downy stuff, and also that they have incredible saves. Pretty much everything, if not everything, is on a 2+ standard save, and the vast majority of their units has a 4+ invuln too. Its attachment in particular is quite interesting, because it focuses on controlling objectives for buffs and their purifier squads, which my opponent brought 2 or 3 of, I believe. Essentially, it meant that all of his army rerolled once to hit, and if he controlled at least half the objectives in no man's land, or was within 6 inches of his purifier squads, he got to reroll the entire hit roll. For this tournament, or for at least the group stage, my list is pretty standard. I've gone for a Stalker with Aura of Terror to grant sticky, 6 Brigands, 5 Carnivores, 2 units of 3 Nurglings, and a Beast of Nurgle to be an action monkey. My opponent's army consisted of Caldor Drago, leading some Terminators, Brother Captain Stern, Castellan Crow leading 10 Purifiers, due to his buff of +1 attack, Grandmaster and Nemesis Dread Knight, and 2 other Nemesis Dread Knights. He also brought some Purifier squads, some Purgation squads, and a Strike squad which also has sticky. So the standard stuff, I take a look to see his most dangerous units, in this case Caldor and the Termies, as he get lethal hits on the charge, and because of his ability, they essentially get a 6-inch charge, and also the 3 Nemesis Dread Knight units. I put my Beast of Nurgle in Deep Strike, and he puts Caldor's unit, Crow in his Purifiers, and I think another 5 Purifiers. I win the roll off and let my opponent deploy first, and this is how the map looks after the deployment. We roll off to see who goes first, and my opponent wins, and with that we get to first turn, my opponent's secondaries. He draws Mark for Death and engage on all fronts. Mark for Death will be near and impossible, but engage on all fronts is definitely doable. My opponent's entire first turn was pretty reserved. He moved one of the Purgation squads up the right side of the board, and towards the top he moved another. This allowed him to score for engage, and then he discarded Mark for Death for an extra CP. My first turn, and I drew Containment and Established Locus, 2 pretty decent secondaries. The Established Locus would make me push up and pretty much sacrifice a War Dog to score, but I do just that. I push a Carnivore into the ruins at the bottom to score Containment, and the same with the Carnivore at the top left. I then push a Brigand, I think it was to the centre right objective to score Containment, and also force my opponent to deal with it, as otherwise I'll be scoring max next turn. I then have another Carnivore push up to the centre left objective, and a Brigand next to it towing the objective in the top left. I then have some Nurglings screen my deployment and start pushing my Stalker to the right, where I feel a lot of the fighting is going to take place. In my shooting phase, I just focus on taking one model out, as many of the units as I can, to try and force battle shock tests later in the game. I end up doing so on 2 of the Purgation squads. End of my turn, my opponent brings up a Purgation squad, as well as his Grandmaster Dread Knight and a normal Dread Knight. That was it for my turn, and I scored 6 for Containment and 2 on Established Locus. My opponent's second turn, and he draws Assassination and Containment. I'm quite fortunate he's drawn Assassination early in the game, as each of his Dread Knights have the capability to kill 2 War Dogs a turn if all things go well for him. But the way I'm positioned, he shouldn't be able to get an angle on my Stalker, and even if he could, it would mean he isn't focusing on more immediate threats. End of his movement, and this is where it's quite apparent I've made a massive error. You see that War Dog in the ruins at the bottom? 2 things. One is that his 2 Dread Knights in the middle left can actually see it, and I'm not more than 1 inch away from the wall, which means my opponent can make the charge. My opponent was a very good sport and offered me the chance to bring it close inwards and out from the wall because it was an obvious overlook on my part, but I didn't want to cheat him out of a deserved kill due to a mistake that I made, and it would feel bad on my part if I did so we left it there. In the shooting phase, he kills my Nurglings. I'll be honest, didn't really utilise them as best I could. I should have probably had them in the terrain with the Carnivore to grant them -1 to hit aura. And he also does some pretty serious damage to my Carnivore, bringing it to 4 wounds. My opponent was hoping for a small charge roll here, otherwise he'd have to go around the terrain to base my Carnivore, and he did so initially, rolling 10, but he CP rerolled into a 4 and got in. At this point he tank shocks, kills my Carnivore, and passes into my Brigand on the objective. Since he charged, even though he killed the unit he charged into, he's still eligible to fight, and he ends up killing that too with this immense melee output. This was just a brilliant play by my opponent, and utilised the space available brilliantly, just couldn't help but say well done. My opponent ends the turn by discarding Assassination and passes the turn to me, where I draw Recover Assets and Area Denial. Again, two very doable secondaries for me. I've definitely been fortunate these first couple of turns. End of my movement phase, I've tried to take as much area in the top left as possible while trying to reinforce the right side. I've done this by putting a Brigand and Stalker with a Demon Breath Spear in line of sight of his Dread Knight, with the hope here to damage it but not kill it, allowing my Carnivore to charge in and consolidate onto the objective. One of my Carnivores goes to the centre for secondaries, and I can't remember which others I had doing them to, unfortunately. I end up actually killing the Dread Knight with a shooting, which wasn't ideal, but it is what it is. I find with the spear in particular, you have to underestimate its damage, something I talked about in my last battle report, and especially when the thing you're targeting has a 4+ invuln. However, I rolled hot and he didn't, and it resulted in one less Dread Knight, which at least counted the result a bit. I also took out another model in his Purgation squad. My opponent ended up bringing up the same Dread Knights as last round, and the 3 models in his Purgation squad. He followed this up by drawing extend battle lines and no prisoners. This was definitely his turn to cause damage, and we both knew it. He deployed Castle and Crow and the Purifiers at the bottom of the board, his 2 Dread Knights in the centre, Drago and the Termies inside the terrain at the top centre of the board. He also drops a Purgation squad and another Purifier squad, I think, on the objective in the bottom right inside the terrain. Looking at this, there's real potential for 3 or 4 of my War Dogs to go down, which would not only score my opponent his secondaries, but would pretty much hinder any momentum I may have on my side. In his shooting phase, he only kills the War Dog at the centre of the battlefield, but also causes damage to the ones at the bottom of the board. Comes to the charge phase, and he actually fails to charge into the War Dogs at the bottom, but can't use a CP reroll, because the need to get onto the objective at the centre left is much more important, but he ends up making that charge anyway. Caldor and his unit kill my Carnivore and consolidate, actually putting one of his models within engagement range of the Brigand to the left, meaning that I'm going to be at -1 to shoot into them the next turn. And that's how it ended. He scored both secondaries and passed it to me. I draw Cleanse and No Man's Land. Technically 2 pretty easy secondaries to score. There's a lot of potential avenues to go down, so if I didn't do much damage this turn, I'd probably end up losing the War of Attrition and he'd have too much control in the late game. Here you can see all the different thought processes that were going through my head in terms of movement and objective play. There's a lot of temptation to play it, probably smarter and go for objective play, but I was pretty confident if I could take out his Dread Knights, I think I could weather the storm for his other units, especially if I kept chipping at Caldor's squad and keeping them stuck there. So I made some pretty big moves and sent 2 of my Carnivores up to get ready to charge the Dread Knights, another one to be able to charge into his Terminators. I also moved my Brigands and Stalkers into positions where they could get lines of sight into the Dread Knights. I ended up killing the Dread Knight and one of the Terminators in the shooting phase, and got all 3 charges off. Charge phase ended up with Caldor only having 2 Terminator bodyguards left, and the Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight on 6 wounds, in return for interrupting and killing the other Carnivore engaged with it. End of my turn, my opponent brings up a Strike squad and a Purifier squad, I think, and then I discard Cleanse. Beginning of turn 3, and I'm seeing a 56 to my opponent's 47. It's a lead, but not a comfortable one, and that could flip pretty easily, especially due to the board presence Grey Knights can command. My opponent draws Defend Stronghold and Secure No Man's Land. Defend is normally a given, and he's in a solid position to score Secure 2. Beginning of my opponent's turn, and he's taking Battleshock's tests left, right and centre. Fortunately, he used Insane Bravery on his brother Captain Stern turn 2, so when he failed the Battleshock test with his Grandmaster Dread Knight, I decided to use the Terror Shade stratagem, expecting a few wounds hopefully. So you remember how I said his Dread Knight had 6 wounds left? I only went and caused 6 mortals, taking him out, which is more than I could have hoped for. It was definitely one of those moments in the game where you just had to laugh at how insane it was. And I also Battleshock Caldor's squad as well, which was a nice cherry on top. His deployment and everything was down, ready to try and take out a few more dogs. He has a Strike squad positioned at the top, ready to charge any of the Carnivores should his shooting kill one of them, which it did. There were then a couple of successful charges on his side, aided by the fact that due to his home and the mid-board being hallowed ground, he had a strat where he could deep shot within 6. Crow and his cronies wanted to charge my Stalker and Brigand, while his Strike squad went into my Carnivore at the top. Fortunately, they all survived, although quite beaten, and managed to do some more damage in return, including killing another one of his Terminators, and at the end of the turn, he scores Secure. My turn, and I also draw Defend Stronghold and no prisoners, which I was very happy about. He has quite a few units on the table that are definitely able to be wiped out this turn. After scoring max on primary, I sit at 71 to my opponent's 62. Again, only 9-point lead so far, but hopefully by the end of the turn I'll have at least another 5 with 3 more to follow. I push up my brigands to be in shooting positions, and I desperate escape my carnivore, which I end up passing, which allows my brigands to shoot into his squads on the objective. In an immense ton of shooting, I kill the final Terminator, Drago, with the meld straight to the face, the strike squad, and then all but 2 of Crow's Purifier bodyguard. And this here just shows how weak my 2 war dogs were at the bottom. I think they only had a few wounds each, and my opponent dedicated the attacks actually perfectly. I don't think there was any overspill whatsoever. So going to the 4th turn, I had 2 pretty lonely war dogs at home and the centre, then a couple of brigands and a beast of Nurgle in the top left, and the Nurglings at the bottom left, trying their hardest to screen the home deployment, most likely from a Purgation squad that he brought up, depending on what he draws next turn. Beginning of the 4th, and my lead is at 11, with defence still to score. This is definitely going to be a close game, and the secondaries are going to be key decider. The secondaries he draws are area denial behind enemy lines, which are doable, so 9 points here on offer if he can max them out. He fails Battle Shock with Crow, but moves the unit just outside of charge range of the Brigand, which I'm not too worried about since he has 0 OC with that unit. He also drops some Purifiers near the centre to hold the objective and to score the secondary. The unit I am scared of though is the Purgation squad that has dropped in my deployment zone. Each of those have 2 OC, which would flip that objective and mean I would only score a max of 5 on primary on my final turn, and quite frankly, there's not really much I can do about it except from hope for the best. His shooting kills my lone carnival up top, and then we get to the charges. It's one thing that you may notice, and that's that the Purgation squad didn't make the charge, so that objective, no matter what, will be mine at the beginning of my turn, which was a massive relief. His Purifier squad also charged my 2 brigands, but that ended up in a stalemate with nothing on either side dying. Beginning of my turn, I draw Cull the Hold and Storm Hostile. I can't do Cull, so I redraw, get and bring it down, which I end up CP recycling, and get marked for death. So I basically went through all of that, not to be able to score it anyway, as he chose the Purgation squad on the right, Purgation squad on my deployment, and the Purifier squad in the centre. My only movement is bringing my Nurglings up to Crow, my Beast of Nurgle to the front line, created up there to see what it can charge. In the shooting phase, I kill all but one of the Purifiers at the top, and I wipe out Crow and the Purifiers. Now, that ended up being the end of the game, and the final score, 89-88 in my favour. This is honestly such a fun but intense game that had me think about so many different routes and actions and consequences, but was amazing. My opponent was a fantastic sport and a true pleasure to play against, and hopefully he gets one of the wildcard spaces to go to knockouts. Anyway then, that's all for the game. At the time of editing, I have played my Raven Guard game, but I won't spoil that result, but it should be up next week hopefully. Thank you all, take care.